The private elevator in the Blackwell Tower rose smoothly toward the penthouse, carrying Marcus Blackwell to his sanctuary above Manhattan. At 47, he had achieved what most considered impossible, building a $12 billion empire from nothing, transforming himself from a poor kid in the Bronx to one of America's wealthiest men. Yet as the elevator climbed, he felt the familiar emptiness that no amount of money seemed to fill. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell." His assistant James greeted him as the elevator doors opened directly into his apartment. The space was a monument to excess. 15,000 square feet of marble, crystal, and custom furniture that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But Marcus barely noticed the opulence anymore. What caught his attention was the sound of humming coming from the kitchen, accompanied by the rhythmic swish of a mop against hardwood floors. Evelyn Harris had been his housekeeper for 3 years, arriving each morning at 6 and leaving long after most of his staff had gone home. She was a black woman in her early 50s, with graying hair always tied back in a neat bun, and hands that showed the wear of decades of domestic work. Marcus had hired her through an agency, impressed by her impeccable references and the quiet dignity she maintained even during the interview process. "Evening. Mr. Blackwell," Evelyn called out without looking up from her work. "Dinner's keeping warm in the oven." "The chef left at 7. Marcus nodded, loosening his $3,000 tie as he walked toward the kitchen. He had noticed over the years that Evelyn never called him sir, unless other staff were present, never fawned over his wealth, never asked for extras beyond her agreed-upon salary. She was efficient, professional, and virtually invisible, exactly what he thought he wanted in domestic staff. But tonight something was different. Maybe it was the quarterly board meeting where he'd watched executives compete for his approval, like dogs begging for scraps. Maybe it was the lunch with his fourth wife's divorce lawyer, calculating how many millions she'd receive for their 18-month marriage. Or maybe it was simply the accumulation of years surrounded by people whose affection came with price tags. "Evelyn," Marcus said, pausing in the kitchen doorway. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years next month, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, wringing out her mop with practiced efficiency. "And in all that time, you've never asked me for anything. Not a raise, not extra time off, not even a reference letter." Evelyn straightened up, meeting his eyes directly. "I was hired to do a job, Mr. Blackwell. I do it to the best of my ability. That's what my mother taught me. Work speaks louder than words." As Marcus watched her return to her cleaning, an idea began to form in his mind. A test that would prove, once and for all, whether anyone in his life valued him for who he was rather than what he could provide. It would be simple, elegant, and revealing. He would give his staff unlimited access to his wealth and watch what they chose to do with it. What he didn't realize was that this decision would not only change his understanding of human nature, but would force him to confront the racial and class prejudices that had shaped his life and career. The woman mopping his kitchen floor would become his greatest teacher, her choices revealing truths about wealth, worth, and human dignity that no business school or boardroom had ever taught him. Marcus Blackwell's origin story was the kind of narrative that inspired venture capitalists and business school students. Born in 1978 to a single mother in the Morrisania projects, he had learned early that the world divided people into 2 categories, those who had money and those who served those who had money. His mother, Dolores, worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waitressing during the day, and taking in sewing when time allowed. She had been a black woman navigating a system designed to extract labor while offering minimal compensation in return. Young Marcus showed exceptional mathematical ability, teaching himself to read financial statements by studying the newspapers his mother brought home from her cleaning jobs. He understood by age 12 that wealth wasn't about working harder. It was about owning systems that allowed others to work for you. While his friends dreamed of basketball scholarships or rap careers, Marcus studied Warren Buffett's investment strategies and practiced calculating compound interest on borrowed calculators. The racial dynamics of his upbringing were impossible to ignore. The building superintendents were white, the store owners were white, the police officers were white, and the teachers who decided which students would be labeled gifted were overwhelmingly white. The black and brown people in his neighborhood worked in service of this white infrastructure, cleaning apartments they could never afford, delivering food they couldn't buy, driving cars they would never own. By 15, Marcus had developed a philosophy that would guide his entire life. Money was the only reliable protection against racism. If you became rich enough, your race became secondary to your economic power. He watched how white people treated his mother when she wore her cleaning uniform versus when she dressed up for church. The same woman, the same dignity, but entirely different levels of respect based on perceived economic status. Evelyn Harris's story was different, but connected by the same economic threads. Born in rural Mississippi in 1972, she was the youngest of 8 children, in a family that had been sharecroppers for generations. Her grandmother had worked in white homes during Jim Crow, her mother had cleaned hotel rooms, and Evelyn had assumed she would follow the same path. The difference was timing. She came of age during the civil rights movement's aftermath, with access to education and opportunities that previous generations had been denied. But opportunity in rural Mississippi was relative. Evelyn graduated high school at 16, earned an associate degree in early childhood education by 18, and discovered that teaching jobs in her area paid less than domestic work in urban centers. At 20, she moved to Chicago to work as a live-in nanny for a wealthy white family, leaving her own infant daughter with her mother. Over the next 3 decades, Evelyn worked for dozens of wealthy families across Chicago, New York, and eventually Los Angeles. She saw patterns that Marcus Blackwell had never been taught to recognize. How employers who paid domestic workers poverty wages thought nothing of spending thousands on dinner parties. How they would forget to pay her while purchasing designer handbags. How they would praise her good work ethic while denying her basic labor protections. Most telling was how race influenced these relationships. White employers would comment on how reliable she was compared to the lazy, black women they knew from popular culture stereotypes. They would ask her opinion about black issues, as if she represented the entire race. The compliments always carried the implication that she was exceptional among black people, rather than simply competent among people generally. Despite these experiences, Evelyn maintained her dignity through faith, family, and a belief that honest work was its own reward. She had raised her daughter to become a nurse, helped put her younger siblings through school, and sent money home to Mississippi to support aging relatives. Her relationship to wealthy white people was professional rather than personal. She provided services, they provided payment, and both parties maintained the appropriate boundaries. What she never expected was that one of her employers would turn her life into an experiment designed to test his theories about human nature. The day Marcus Blackwell decided to test his staff began like any other in the penthouse apartment. Evelyn arrived at 6 a.m. as she always did, her uniform crisp and her supplies organized in the rolling cart she had used for decades. She followed her familiar routine, starting coffee, checking which rooms needed attention, and reviewing the day's schedule posted on the kitchen bulletin board. What was different was the black envelope sitting on the marble counter, her name written across it in silver ink. Beside it lay a credit card that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a black American Express Centurion card, the kind that required annual spending of $250,000 or more to maintain. "Evelyn," Marcus said as he entered the kitchen, already dressed in his custom suit despite the early hour. "I want to thank you for your years of service. That's for you, a gift, no strings attached." Evelyn picked up the envelope cautiously, as if it might contain something dangerous. "What kind of gift, Mr. Blackwell?" "Unlimited credit card. Your name, your account, but I pay the bills. Use it however you want for the next 3 days. No questions asked." The implications of this offer were immediately clear to someone who had spent decades observing how wealthy people operated. Employers who paid minimum wage suddenly became generous when seeking something, whether loyalty, information, or simply to purchase the satisfaction of having given to those they considered less fortunate. But Evelyn also understood that refusing such a gift would be seen as ungrateful, potentially jeopardizing the job that supported her family. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," she said carefully. "That's very generous. I want you to buy whatever you've always wanted, Marcus continued, his tone suggesting he was bestowing liberation rather than temptation. Clothes, jewelry, travel, anything. Don't think about the cost. Just enjoy it. Over the next 3 days, while Marcus monitored the credit card activity through his banking app, Evelyn made purchases that told a story he hadn't expected to read. Her first transaction was at a neighborhood grocery store. Rice, beans, flour, sugar. Basic staples that could stretch to feed a family for weeks. The total was $47.83, less than what Marcus spent on lunch. The second purchase came that afternoon: poster paints, construction paper, and art supplies totaling $83.42. She also bought 200 hot dogs, buns, and condiments for $127.16. Then came children's books, secondhand toys, and diapers, items that suggested she was planning something for families with young children. The contrast with his other staff members became apparent immediately. His personal chef, Pierre, spent $187,000 on a new sports car that arrived the next morning. His chauffeur purchased a diamond-encrusted watch for $45,000. His personal assistant, Malcolm, secretly ordered $92,000 worth of rare Japanese whiskeys, but it was Evelyn's purchases that captured Marcus's attention, not because of their extravagance, but because of their mystery. While other staff members were buying status symbols that announced their newfound purchasing power, she was accumulating what looked like supplies for a community event. On the second day, Evelyn bought 200 colorful balloons, 30 pounds of sugar, enough art supplies to stock a small classroom, and a clown costume complete with red nose and oversized shoes. She also rented a delivery van, suggesting whatever she was planning would require transportation logistics. The third day brought the revelation that would change everything. Marcus had decided to follow the latest transactions in real time, watching as Evelyn's credit card was used at multiple locations across the city. She purchased $80,000 worth of computer equipment, educational software, and furniture from an educational supply company. Then came medical supplies, wheelchairs, and assistive devices from a medical equipment supplier. What Marcus discovered that afternoon would not only answer his questions about Evelyn's character, but would force him to confront his own assumptions about wealth, worth, and the people who had spent their lives in service to people like him. The purchases weren't random acts of generosity. They were part of a plan that revealed more about racial and class dynamics in America than any business school case study could provide. The final transaction came at 6:47 p.m. on the third day. A $50,000 check made out to Hope Haven Children's Home, with the memo line reading, "For the children who deserve better." The revelation of Evelyn's purchases should have marked the end of Marcus's experiment, but instead, it marked the beginning of something far more complex. Within days, word spread through his social circles that his housekeeper had received unlimited access to his wealth and had chosen to spend it on charity rather than luxury. The reactions revealed uncomfortable truths about how wealthy people viewed those who served them. His personal chef, Pierre, was the first to express his displeasure. "It's insulting," he complained during a private dinner preparation. "She had access to the same resources we did, and she bought hot dogs and art supplies? It's like she's trying to make some kind of point about being morally superior." The comment was made in French, assuming Evelyn wouldn't understand, but she had learned to recognize the tone of criticism regardless of language. Pierre's resentment was particularly telling. He had spent his windfall on a sports car that now seemed ostentatious rather than earned. The contrast between their choices had become a mirror that reflected uncomfortable truths about values and priorities. More surprising was the reaction from Marcus's business associates. During a board meeting the following week, several executives made veiled references to staff who forget their place and the dangers of confusing generosity with entitlement. The implication was clear. Evelyn's decision to spend money on others rather than herself was being interpreted as a rejection of the social hierarchy. The most direct challenge came from Marcus's financial advisor, who arrived at the penthouse with a laptop full of spreadsheets and a concerned expression. "Marcus, we need to discuss the implications of your Experiment, he began. Beyond the immediate financial impact, there are tax implications, liability concerns, and, frankly, questions about judgment that investors are asking. What kind of questions? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Whether someone who gives unlimited access to household staff can be trusted with shareholder money. Whether your housekeeper's spending spree indicates a lack of oversight in your business dealings. Whether this whole affair suggests you're losing your edge. The most sophisticated attack came through Evelyn's family. Her daughter, Denise, was a nurse at a prestigious New York hospital. Suddenly, her schedule was changed to include more overnight shifts and weekend hours, making it difficult for her to care for her own children. When Denise asked about the changes, her supervisor suggested that family situations could affect job performance. The message was being delivered through multiple channels. Evelyn had violated an unwritten code by using wealth to help others rather than herself, and there would be consequences for challenging the social order. What Marcus witnessed during this period was an education in the true nature of American class dynamics. He had believed that his wealth insulated him from the racial and economic prejudices that had shaped his mother's life. But watching how the system responded to Evelyn's perceived transgression revealed that his money had simply bought him a different position within the same hierarchy. What he began to understand was that Evelyn's actions had threatened a system that depended on keeping poor people, especially poor black people, in their place. Her generosity had been interpreted as an act of rebellion because it suggested that communities had resources to share, that they might not be as dependent on the wealthy as the wealthy needed them to be. The turning point came when Marcus received a package containing a flash drive and a handwritten note. Your housekeeper isn't who you think she is. Thought you should know before someone else tells you. The video on the flash drive showed Evelyn during her supposed days off, but instead of relaxing or shopping for herself, she was visiting a network of community organizations, a food bank where she volunteered, a community garden where she taught children to grow vegetables, a church where she organized donation drives, and most surprising, a small but well-maintained house in Queens where she lived with 2 teenage boys who were clearly not her children. The video included financial records that showed Evelyn had been using her modest salary to support not just her own family, but an extended network of people in need. She had been paying rent for a homeless veteran, buying groceries for an elderly neighbor, and funding college application fees for several high school students. But the most shocking revelation came near the end of the video, evidence that Evelyn Harris was not actually Evelyn Harris. Her real name was Evelyn Johnson, and she had a criminal record for embezzlement. 20 years earlier, she had been convicted of stealing from a wealthy family she had worked for, serving 18 months in prison before being released on parole. The embezzlement had involved $50,000 taken over 2 years and used to pay medical bills for her daughter's life-threatening illness. The implications were devastating. If Evelyn had stolen from previous employers, her current generosity might be part of a long con designed to gain Marcus's trust before she took something more valuable. When Marcus confronted Evelyn with what he had learned, her reaction was neither denial nor panic, but rather the quiet acceptance of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 20 years. I figured you'd find out eventually, she said. Because you wouldn't have hired me. Once you've been convicted of stealing from your employers, you're marked for life. My daughter needed food and shelter, and I needed work that paid enough to provide it. What Marcus understood during this conversation was that Evelyn's crime had been an act of desperation rather than greed. She hadn't stolen to buy luxury items or fund an extravagant lifestyle. She had stolen to keep her child alive in a healthcare system that treated illness as a profit opportunity rather than a human crisis. More importantly, he realized that her current work represented a form of redemption that the criminal justice system rarely acknowledges. She had spent 20 years not just obeying the law, but actively working to improve conditions for others who face the same kinds of systemic barriers that had driven her to theft. The choice Marcus faced was clear. He could use this information to justify firing Evelyn and protecting himself from potential scandal, Or he could see it as an opportunity to understand how systems create the conditions that force people to make desperate choices. Marcus chose the second option. Instead of using the video as justification for firing Evelyn, he chose to defend her publicly and privately, creating a new role for himself that transcended the traditional boundaries between employer and employee. The first step was using his wealth and influence to address some of the systemic issues that Evelyn's story illuminated. Marcus established the Johnson-Blackwell Foundation, named jointly after their mothers, with an initial endowment of $50 million focused on providing educational and economic opportunities for formerly incarcerated people, particularly women of color. The foundation's first major initiative was purchasing and renovating Hope Haven Children's Home, ensuring that the institution would have permanent financial stability. But more than just funding, Marcus used his business expertise to help the organization develop sustainable revenue streams and professional management structures. The second step was perhaps the most radical, inviting Evelyn to become a partner in his business ventures, rather than remaining his employee. This transformation began with her becoming a consultant for his real estate development projects, providing expertise on how to create genuinely affordable housing, rather than the kind of token gestures that developers typically included. Her insights proved invaluable. She knew that affordable housing needed more than just lower rents. It required proximity to public transportation, access to quality schools, and integration with market-rate housing. She understood that community development needed to include small business support, childcare facilities, and gathering spaces. The success of their collaboration led to more ambitious projects. They created a venture capital fund specifically designed to invest in businesses owned and operated by formerly incarcerated people, providing not just capital, but also mentorship and professional networks. The fund's first investment went to a catering company started by a woman who had learned cooking skills while incarcerated. Their most ambitious project was founding the Community Wealth Cooperative, creating worker-owned businesses in historically disinvested neighborhoods. The first cooperative enterprise was a food service business that provided catering, meal delivery, and food education services. The workers, all formerly incarcerated women of color, owned equal shares in the business and shared in decision-making and profits. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus's understanding of his own success. He came to see that his wealth had been built not just on his individual talent but also on systems that had provided him with advantages while creating disadvantages for others. Their partnership demonstrated that individual transformation, while important, was insufficient to address systemic problems. Marcus's change of heart about wealth and success was meaningful, but it became powerful only when it was connected to the structural changes that their work together began to create. The story of Marcus Blackwell and Evelyn Johnson represents more than a simple narrative of individual redemption. It illustrates the complex ways that racism and classism operate in American society, not just through overt discrimination, but through the assumptions and expectations that shape relationships between people of different racial and economic backgrounds. Marcus's initial test was motivated by loneliness and suspicion, but it revealed something significant about how wealth affects human relationships. His assumption that people would react to unlimited resources by indulging themselves reflected his own values more than any universal truth about human nature. What he discovered was that people who had spent their lives serving others often understood generosity in ways that the wealthy could not. Evelyn's response demonstrated the difference between charity and solidarity. She didn't use the money to buy luxury items that would signal her escape from poverty. Instead, she used it to address the systemic needs that she understood from personal experience. Her generosity wasn't about feeling good about helping others, but about recognizing shared vulnerability and shared humanity. The backlash they faced revealed how threatening such generosity could be to existing power structures. The coordinated response from multiple institutions suggested that Evelyn's actions threatened not just individual prejudices, but the entire system that depended on keeping poor people, especially poor Black people, dependent on the wealthy for survival. Their partnership demonstrates that individual transformation, while important, was insufficient to address systemic problems. Marcus's change of heart about wealth and success was meaningful, but it became powerful only when it was connected to the structural changes that their work together began to create. The story illustrates how racism operates in contemporary America, not just through individual prejudice, but through the ways that systems create and maintain racial inequality. Evelyn's criminal record, her experiences with discrimination, and the barriers she faced were all connected to her identity as a Black woman in a society that historically criminalized Black poverty. For viewers and readers, the call to action involves recognizing that addressing racism and classism requires more than individual goodwill. It requires understanding how systems create and maintain inequality and working to change those systems. It means supporting policies that address the structural barriers that keep people in poverty. It means challenging the assumptions we carry about who deserves wealth and what constitutes legitimate economic activity. The story of Marcus and Evelyn suggests that true wealth isn't measured by bank accounts or possessions, but by the capacity to see beyond oneself and work toward justice for others. It shows that redemption is possible when people choose solidarity over separation, understanding over judgment, and shared struggle over individual success.